When Elvis Presley walked into the newly built International Hotel in Las Vegas on July 31st, 1969, his hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold his guitar. Outside the showroom, 2,000 people, celebrities, critics, old fans, curious spectators, were waiting to see if the king of rock and roll still had his crown or if he was just another washed-up has-been trying to relive past glory. Elvis hadn't performed in front of a live audience in 8 years. 8 years of terrible movies, forgettable soundtracks, and watching younger artists steal his thunder. 8 years of feeling irrelevant, obsolete, forgotten. And now, in less than an hour, he'd have to walk onto that stage and prove he still mattered. But as he stood backstage, drenched in sweat, heart pounding, breathing shallow, Elvis was absolutely convinced of one thing. They were going to hate him. They were going to laugh at him. His comeback was going to be a disaster, and the world would watch the king fall. What happened in the next 90 minutes would either resurrect his career or bury it forever. And Elvis had never been more terrified in his entire life. July 1969. Las Vegas, Nevada. The International Hotel, soon to be renamed the Las Vegas Hilton, was the newest, biggest, most expensive hotel on the Strip. Its showroom could hold 2,000 people, making it the largest venue in Vegas. And Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis's manager, had booked Elvis for a month-long residency. 2 shows a night, 7 days a week, for 4 straight weeks. It was an insane schedule, an exhausting commitment, a make-or-break moment. Because Elvis needed this. Desperately. His career was in the toilet. The last time he'd had a legitimate hit single was Crying in the Chapel in 1965, and even that was a gospel song recorded years earlier. His movies, once profitable if creatively bankrupt, weren't even making money anymore. Live a Little, Love a Little. His most recent film had bombed spectacularly. The soundtrack albums nobody wanted. The acting nobody believed. The whole formula that Colonel Parker had been milking for a decade had finally stopped working. Elvis was 34 years old and felt like a relic. The music world had moved on without him. The Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, they were the future. Elvis was the past, a nostalgic memory from the 1950s that parents remembered fondly, while their kids rolled their eyes. The '68 comeback special on NBC had given Elvis a brief moment of hope. For one night, wearing black leather and performing live, he'd reminded people why he'd been the king in the first place. The ratings had been huge, the reviews ecstatic. For a few weeks, Elvis felt relevant again. But that was television. A controlled environment with careful editing and multiple takes. This was Vegas. This was live. 2,000 people watching his every move, ready to judge whether he still had it or if that TV special had been a fluke. And Elvis was terrified it had been a fluke. In the months leading up to Vegas, Elvis had worked harder than he had in years. He'd assembled a new band, top-tier musicians who could actually play, not just session guys going through the motions. He'd hired backup singers, the Sweet Inspirations and the Imperials, who brought power and soul to his sound. He'd rehearsed relentlessly, running through set lists, perfecting arrangements, trying to find the right balance between his old hits and new material. But no amount of rehearsal could quiet the voice in his head saying, "They're going to hate you. You're washed up. You had your moment and you blew it. This is going to be humiliating." Elvis's inner circle, the Memphis Mafia, his group of friends and employees, tried to reassure him. "Boss, you're gonna kill it. You're Elvis Presley. You're the king. They're gonna love you." But Elvis couldn't believe them. He'd heard the whispers, read the articles suggesting his best days were behind him. He'd seen the younger artists taking over his kingdom. He'd felt himself becoming irrelevant, and that feeling had burrowed deep into his psyche like a parasite, eating away at his confidence. The night before opening night, Elvis couldn't sleep. He paced his suite at the International Hotel, smoking cigarettes, running through songs in his head, imagining all the ways tomorrow could go wrong. What if he forgot lyrics? What if his voice cracked? What if the audience sat there in polite silence, too embarrassed to tell him he'd lost it? What if they walked out halfway through? Around 3 a.m., he called his longtime friend, Jerry Schilling. "Jerry, I can't do this. I can't go out there tomorrow. I'm gonna cancel. Tell Colonel I'm sick." Jerry, used to Elvis's pre-show anxiety, tried to calm him down. "Elvis, you're just nervous. That's normal. Once you get on that stage, the adrenaline will kick in and you'll be fine." "No, you don't understand," Elvis said, his voice cracking. "I haven't done this in 8 years. 8 years, Jerry. I don't know if I can still do it. What if I get up there and I freeze? What if they see how scared I am? What if I embarrass myself and everyone who ever believed in me?" "Elvis, listen to me," Jerry said firmly. "You're the best performer I've ever seen. You were born to do this. Tomorrow night, you're going to walk out on that stage and remind the world why you're the king of rock and roll. Trust me." But Elvis couldn't trust it, because the stakes were too high and the fear was too deep and the possibility of failure was too real. But here's what nobody knew yet, and what would make this night so much more powerful. Elvis's fear wasn't just about his career. It was about his identity, his purpose, his entire sense of self-worth. Without the stage, without the music, without the connection to an audience, who was he? Just another rich guy in a mansion, surrounded by people who wanted his money and his fame, but didn't really know him. The stage was the only place Elvis had ever felt truly alive, and he was terrified that door had closed forever. July 31st, 1969. Opening night. Elvis arrived at the International Hotel around 6 p.m. for the 8 p.m. show. He went straight to his dressing room and locked the door. For the next 2 hours, he sat alone, staring at himself in the mirror, trying to recognize the person looking back. He was wearing a custom-made karate-inspired jumpsuit, black with a high collar and no belt. It was a new look for him, a departure from the suits and tuxedos he'd worn in the past. He wanted to look contemporary, dangerous, relevant, not like some oldies act trading on nostalgia. But looking at himself now, he wondered if the jumpsuit was ridiculous, if he looked like he was trying too hard, if the audience would laugh at this. 34-year-old man dressed like he was still dangerous when everyone knew he'd spent the last 8 years making Beach Party, movies. His band was warming up in the showroom. He could hear the bass rumbling through the walls, the drums keeping time, the horns warming up their embouchures. The sound should have been exciting. Instead, it made him nauseous. Colonel Parker knocked on the door. "Elvis, we need to talk about tomorrow's schedule and—" "Not now, Colonel," Elvis said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Elvis, I'm coming in." "I said not now." Parker left, but not before Elvis heard him muttering to someone in the hallway. "He's having one of his episodes. Just leave him alone." An episode. That's what they called it when Elvis's anxiety got so bad he could barely function. When the pressure and the expectations and the fear became so overwhelming that he shut down completely. It had happened before. Cancelled shows, postponed recordings, entire days lost to paralyzing worry. But this was different. This wasn't some county fair or movie set. This was Vegas. This was his career on the line. He couldn't have an episode tonight. At 7:30 p.m., there was another knock on the door, softer this time. "Elvis? It's Priscilla, Elvis's wife." They'd been married for 2 years, though the marriage was already strained. But she was here tonight, supporting him, believing in him even when he couldn't believe in himself. He opened the door. Priscilla took one look at his face, pale, sweating, terrified, and immediately understood. She'd seen him like this before, but never this bad. "Baby, talk to me," she said, closing the door behind her. "What's going on?" "I can't do it," Elvis said, and now he was crying. "I can't go out there. They're gonna hate me, Scylla. They're gonna see that I'm not who I used to be, that I'm just some guy who used to be famous. I'm gonna fail. I'm gonna embarrass myself, and you and everyone who ever believed in me. Priscilla took his hands. Listen to me, Elvis. You're the most talented person I've ever met. When you get on that stage, something happens to you. You become electric. You become larger than life. That hasn't changed. That's still in you. You just have to trust it. But what if it's gone? Elvis whispered. What if I lost it and I didn't even notice? What if the last 8 years killed whatever made me special? Then you'll find it again, Priscilla said. Tonight, on that stage, you'll find it because that's who you are. You're Elvis Presley, and Elvis Presley doesn't quit. At 7:50 p.m., 10 minutes before showtime, Elvis stood backstage listening to the crowd. He could hear them talking, laughing, ordering drinks. 2,000 people. He peeked through the curtain and saw celebrities in the front rows. Cary Grant, Sammy Davis Jr., Paul Anka, Fats Domino. People who'd seen the best performers in the world. People who would know immediately if he wasn't up to standard anymore. His band was in position. His backup singers were ready. The lights were set. Everything was perfect, except for the star of the show, who was having a full-blown panic attack backstage. The physical symptoms were overwhelming. His chest felt tight, like someone was standing on it. His vision was tunneling. His hands had gone cold and numb. He could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears, drowning out everything else. This wasn't just nerves. This was his body shutting down, convinced it was about to die. He grabbed onto a piece of equipment backstage to steady himself. His legs felt like they might give out at any moment. Sweat was pouring down his face, soaking through his jumpsuit. He tried to take deep breaths but couldn't get enough air. The walls were closing in. The room was spinning. His guitarist, James Burton, came over. "Elvis, man, we're ready when you are. But you okay? You look like you're about to pass out." "I'm fine," Elvis lied, but his voice came out as barely a whisper. "Just give me a minute." But he wasn't fine. His heart was racing so fast he thought it might explode. His hands were shaking uncontrollably. His breathing was shallow and rapid. Every instinct in his body was screaming, "Run! Get out of here! Don't do this! This is going to be a disaster." He thought about all the people in that showroom, waiting, judging, ready to write him off as a has-been. He thought about the critics with their pens ready to savage him in tomorrow's papers. He thought about Colonel Parker counting on this residency to save their financial situation. He thought about all the musicians and staff who'd worked so hard to make this show perfect. All depending on him, all about to watch him fail. Hold on. You haven't seen the most crucial moment yet. Because what happened in the next 60 seconds would determine whether Elvis walked onto that stage or ran away from his last chance at relevance. Charlie Hodge, Elvis's longtime friend and on-stage assistant, grabbed Elvis by the shoulders and looked him dead in the eyes. "Elvis, listen to me. I know you're scared. I know you think you can't do this. But I've been with you since the beginning. I've seen you perform 1,000 times, and I'm telling you right now, you were born for this moment. Not for those stupid movies. Not for Colonel Parker's cash grabs. For this. For standing on a stage and connecting with people through music. That's your gift. That's your purpose. And if you walk away from it now, you'll regret it for the rest of your life." Elvis stared at Charlie, tears streaming down his face. "But what if I fail?" "Then you fail," Charlie said simply. "But at least you tried. At least you didn't let fear win. At least you gave yourself a chance to be great again." At 8 p.m. exactly, the house lights dimmed. The crowd quieted. The band started playing the opening number, "Blue Suede Shoes," one of Elvis's earliest hits. The introduction was building, the moment approaching when Elvis would have to walk through that curtain and face his fears. Elvis closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and made a decision. He could run or he could fight. He could let 8 years of bad movies and lost confidence define him, Or he could reclaim what was his. He could die on that stage, or he could be reborn. He stepped through the curtain. The spotlight hit him. 2,000 people erupted. The roar was deafening. Screams, applause, people on their feet before he'd even opened his mouth. And in that moment, something shifted. The fear didn't disappear, but it transformed. Adrenaline replaced paralysis. Instinct took over. This was what he knew how to do. This was who he was. He grabbed the microphone, looked out at the sea of faces, smiled, and started to sing. Well, it's 1 for the money, 2 for the show, 3 to get ready now. Go, cat, go. And just like that, Elvis Presley was back. But you're not seeing the full picture yet. Because what happened over the next 90 minutes wasn't just a good show. It was a masterclass, a resurrection. Proof that talent doesn't disappear. It just goes dormant, waiting for the right moment to explode back to life. Elvis didn't just perform his old hits, he attacked them. He reimagined them. All shook up, became heavier, more raw, stripped of the pop sheen it had accumulated over the years. Hound Dog had new energy, new attitude. He wasn't singing it like a cute novelty anymore. He was singing it like a man reclaiming his territory. He moved across the stage with a physicality and sexual energy that reminded everyone why parents had been terrified of him in the 50s. The karate moves he'd been studying for years became part of his performance vocabulary. Sharp, powerful, commanding. The audience couldn't take their eyes off him. This wasn't the bloated, uncomfortable movie star they'd seen on screen. This wasn't the guy making beach party films and looking embarrassed about it. This was a predator, a force of nature. The real Elvis Presley, unleashed after years of captivity. But he also did new material, songs from his recent album From Elvis in Memphis. Real, substantial songs with depth and meaning. In the Ghetto, a socially conscious song about poverty and violence that showed Elvis could handle serious subject matter. Suspicious Minds, a soul-infused powerhouse that would become his signature Vegas song. Don't Cry Daddy, an emotional ballad that had grown men in the audience wiping their eyes. Songs that showed he wasn't just a nostalgia act. He was still a relevant, powerful artist with something to say. The band was incredible, tight, professional, elevated. James Burton's guitar work was tasteful and inventive. The rhythm section was locked in like a machine. The horns added punch and dynamics. And the backup singers, the Sweet Inspirations and the Imperials, brought gospel fire that made even the rockabilly numbers feel transcendent. This wasn't just Elvis and a backup band. This was a musical force operating at the highest level. And Elvis, feeding off their energy and the crowd's reaction, kept pushing harder, reaching deeper, giving more than anyone expected. He told stories between songs, joked with the audience, made fun of himself and his movies in a way that was self-deprecating but not desperate. "Yeah, I made some terrible movies," he said with a grin. "Clambake? What was I thinking? But hey, they paid for this jumpsuit." The audience laughed with him, not at him. He showed vulnerability, admitting he was nervous, thanking people for giving him another chance. But he did it from a position of strength, not weakness. This wasn't a washed-up star begging for acceptance. This was a king reclaiming his throne, gracious but powerful. And the audience loved him for it. They weren't just watching a performance, they were witnessing a comeback, a resurrection, the return of the king. People were crying, not sad tears, but tears of joy, of relief, of witnessing something special. This was one of those rare moments when you knew you were watching history being made. Halfway through the show, Elvis paused and looked out at the crowd. The venue was completely silent, hanging on his every word. "You know," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I haven't done this in a long time. I forgot how much I missed it, how much I need it. Thank you for still caring. Thank you for giving me another chance. Thank you for reminding me why I do this." The crowd erupted again, and Elvis, energized by their love, launched into Suspicious Minds, a song that would become his last #1 hit. He performed it with such intensity, such raw emotion, that when the song ended, the entire showroom was on its feet, applauding, screaming, demanding more. The 90-minute show stretched to 2 hours because Elvis kept adding encores. He couldn't leave the stage, didn't want to leave the stage. Out there, in the spotlight, connecting with the audience, he was alive in a way he hadn't been in 8 years. Out there, he was Elvis again. Not a movie star, not a brand, just a man with a guitar and a gift and a second chance. When the show finally ended, Elvis walked off stage soaked in sweat, physically exhausted, emotionally drained, and happier than he'd been in years. His dressing room filled with celebrities and critics, all of them raving. Cary Grant shook his hand. "That was extraordinary. You're still the best there is." Sammy Davis Jr. hugged him. "Welcome back, man. We missed you." Even Colonel Parker, usually stoic and calculating, had tears in his eyes. Priscilla kissed him. I told you you still had it." Elvis collapsed into a chair, still shaking. Not from fear this time, but from adrenaline, relief, joy. "I can't believe I almost didn't do it. I almost let fear win." The reviews the next morning were ecstatic. Variety called it the greatest single performance of his career. Rolling Stone said Elvis had proven he was still relevant, still powerful, still the king. The show sold out for the entire month-long residency, and suddenly, Elvis Presley was back on top. But the most important review came from Elvis himself. Days later, he told a friend, "I learned something that night. I learned that the only thing holding me back was me. Not age, not the passage of time, not changing musical tastes. Just fear. Fear of failing. Fear of being rejected. Fear of not being enough. And when I finally pushed through that fear, I found everything I'd been looking for. I found myself again. You won't believe this, but that Vegas opening night in 1969 didn't just save Elvis's career. It set the template for the next 8 years of his life, for better and worse. The Vegas residency became an annual tradition. Elvis would return to the International Hotel, later the Hilton, twice a year, performing month-long runs that were always sold out, always successful, always profitable. The venue couldn't keep up with demand. People were booking rooms months in advance just to get tickets. Celebrities flew in from around the world to see Elvis in his element. He also started touring again. Short tours across America, playing arenas and stadiums, reconnecting with fans who'd waited years to see him perform live. For a few years, it was glorious. Elvis was relevant again, making real money again, performing in front of real audiences again. The 1970–1973 period was a creative and commercial renaissance. Great albums like Elvis, That's the Way It Is, and Elvis Country, powerful performances documented in films and recordings, a documentary that captured his return to form. He received standing ovations everywhere he went. Critics who'd written him off had to eat their words. Younger artists cited him as an influence again. He'd done what seemed impossible. He'd made a comeback and sustained it. But the warning signs were already there, visible to anyone paying close attention. The schedule was punishing. 2 shows a night meant Elvis was performing 4 hours every single day during residencies. His vocal cords were strained. His body was exhausted. And to keep up the pace, he was taking more and more pills, prescription, medications that doctors handed out too, freely, because he was Elvis Presley. And you don't say no to the king, and this is where the tragedy creeps back in. The Vegas residency also became a trap. Colonel Parker, seeing how profitable it was, kept booking longer and longer engagements. 2 shows a night, 7 days a week, month after month. It was exhausting, repetitive, soul-crushing in its relentlessness. Elvis was performing, yes, but he wasn't creating. He was doing the same show, night after night, year after year. The spontaneity and danger that made the 1969 opening night so special gradually disappeared, replaced by routine and obligation. The jumpsuit that had looked dangerous and contemporary in 1969 became a costume. The performances that had been electric became mechanical, and Elvis, trapped in the Vegas cycle, started medicating just to get through it. Uppers to perform, downers to sleep, pills to numb the boredom and frustration. The prescription drug addiction that would eventually kill him flourished in the Vegas years, fueled by the impossible schedule and the creative stagnation. By 1977, Elvis was a shell of the man who'd conquered Vegas in 1969. Overweight, addicted, exhausted. Still performing because Colonel Parker kept booking shows, but without the passion or purpose that had made him great. The audiences still came, loyalty and nostalgia are powerful, but they weren't seeing the king. They were seeing a tragedy in slow motion. Elvis died on August 16, 1977, and while his death was caused by prescription drug abuse and heart failure, it was also caused by the very success that had saved him 8 years earlier. Vegas had given him back his career, but it had also given him a golden cage he couldn't escape from. That's the night Elvis conquered Vegas and saved his career. But really, it's the story of what happens when you face your biggest fear and discover you're stronger than you thought. It's about the courage it takes to walk back onto a stage after being gone for 8 years and risk complete humiliation. It's about second chances and the joy of rediscovering your purpose. But it's also about how victory can become its own trap, how the thing that saves you can also destroy you, how even Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, could be imprisoned by his own success. On July 31, 1969, Elvis Presley was terrified they'd hate him. Instead, they loved him. They celebrated him. They crowned him king all over again. And for one perfect night, Elvis remembered what it felt like to be great, to be alive, to be exactly who he was born to be. The tragedy is that he spent the next 8 years trying to recapture that feeling, performing the same show over and over in the same venue until the magic faded, and all that was left was exhaustion, addiction, and the slow death of a legend who'd fought so hard for a second chance only to waste it on a treadmill of obligation and repetition. But on that opening night in 1969, none of that mattered. For 90 minutes, stretched to 2 hours because Elvis couldn't leave the stage, the king was back, and it was glorious. Tell us in the comments, have you ever pushed through fear to achieve something great? Do you think Elvis's Vegas success saved him or trapped him? What would you have done differently? Let us know what city you're watching from today. Subscribe to our channel for more emotional and untold stories of Elvis Presley, the human side of legends, and the relationships that shaped and scarred them. Hit the bell to never miss a story that matters.